All right. Good afternoon and welcome to the November 24th, 2020 study session. Madam Clerk, roll call, please.
The record will reflect that Councilmember Herdman is currently absent.
All right. For members of the public who are here to speak in person, we are in the closing stages of our blood drive. They're cleaning it out right now. And so, by the way, just a quick thank you to our chairwoman, Michelle Steele, for co-hosting that today. If you're here to speak in person, we'll have you come into the chambers. Unless we have too many people, then we'll stagger and hopefully get to the point where we can go back into the community room as well. All right, with that, we'll move into current business. Clarification of items on the consent calendar. Any from you, Ms. Dixon? Mr. Muldoon? Ms. Brenner? Mr. Duffield? Mr. Avery? None. I have none. We'll go into item number 2, the update on city's residential refuse and recycling collection program. Staff, go right ahead.
Yes, good evening, Mayor and Council. Thank you for the time to talk a little bit more. As you know, we've been working in our refuge area for some time, about a year, and we've been going through various contracts, commercial, other things. And as of July, we brought you your first look at our residential contracts. Tonight, we're going to be talking more about our residential contract and negotiations and moves we have to make to keep moving forward on those agreements. With us tonight, just so you know, Will O'Neill is our consultant with economics. He's up here, and also, I'm sorry,
let's go with
Will O'Toole.
There you go.
O'Toole. I'm sorry, excuse me.
Nope.
Slip on that. Both Irish. And Dean Ruffridge with CR&R is also joining us in the back for questions if we need it. I'm going to turn this over to Deputy Director Micah Martin. He's going to go through the presentation for you, and then we'll take your questions.
All right, thanks, Dave. So we're here tonight to kind of touch base on our residential refuse program. We had a study session with you back in July, and this is kind of a continuation of that. We've made some progress with some of the direction that was given there. So just really quickly to recap, our solid waste management here in the city, we have various areas that we manage refuse under. One of them being our commercial and industrial businesses, also the contracts that govern construction project demolition and waste. Also our city contracts, which cover our beaches, our street containers, and our facilities. And finally, residential households. And that's one of the main subjects here tonight we'll be talking about. So just a quick overview again. This is a familiar slide for you all, but this is a recap of some of the state legislation that's currently in place or that is coming into effect in the next couple of years moving forward. And these all kind of guide us in the direction we need to go with our programs and kind of are the catalyst for a lot of the changes we need to make. Kind of a current snapshot of where we stand today. We have our overall overall recycling mandate, AB 939. Currently, we're at 62% with that. So we're meeting the diversion requirement, but there's also a program component to this. CalRecycle likes to see that you're not only making your diversion, but you have a fully operational program in place. So in order to get that full operational program, we need to have source separation at the curb. We have a portion of it, but not completely, so you can see that item's not completely done, and that's going to require some modifications to our refuse contract. We have our commercial recycling mandate. We're at 89% diversion on that, and we're doing really well there. We've made a lot of progress in the last year or two. We've updated our municipal code. We've got new franchise hauler agreements in place, and our compliance reporting is really starting to turn the corner on that. We're even at the point now where we're ready to start implementing enforcement as needed. We've hired on some code enforcement staff, and we've got them working directly under our refuse section of the division. And finally, we have commercial organics. There's a goal here of 50%. We're at about 45 now, but this is still a new mandate, and we're working our way through that process. We've updated our municipal code. We've got new franchise agreements in place. We're still waiting on the compliance reporting to be coming in, and we're confident that as that continues to come in throughout the year and into next year, we're going to be in a good position. And then finally, we have organic recycling. That's required by 2022, SB 1383. So this is really the next big piece of legislation that requires a lot of action on our part. We really need to update our program to be able to accommodate this and get the program in place in time. So this is kind of more of a brief overview of our residential collection. We really want to focus on the blue and green areas there. The blue area being the Newport City contract, And then also the green area, which is Newport Coast, that we inherited in through the annexation process. So this is our current CAN program as it stands today. It's a 2-cart collection system. As you can see, the can there on the left is a blue lid. It represents a recycling cart that gets processed at a clean MRF. And then we have a black lid can, which is processed at a dirty MRF, and that handles all the other waste that is not considered a recoverable commodity. Currently, we have over 27,000 residents or residential accounts in the city, and 73% of those households are participating in this program. And our dry recyclable diversion rate for this area is at only 45% or 43%. So there's still some work to do there to get that up to the level it needs to be at.
Mike, are the clean MRFs still not operating just because of COVID, or have they gone back operational?
Actually, all the MRFs are back operational again now. They were
Okay.
finally able to complete that process back in October with all the state mandated requirements to social distance and everything else. So they're back to being operational again.
All right.
Yes.
Can I just ask a quick question? Thank you. Micah, just to put some context for edification for our listeners, the dry cycle diversion rate of 43, your last sentence was, we're not quite where we're supposed to be. What is the number at which we should be?
Well, we need to be over 50%. And
When?
in the previous slide.
Now?
Now, yeah.
And
And the previous slide, showed us that being over 50% overall. So citywide, we're over that threshold. But on this specific program for residential recycling, we're still a little bit under.
as we go forward in this presentation, how would you characterize the city's challenge ahead to comply with current state law and mandates for 2022?
Well, really having the proper program in place. Currently, our contract isn't set up to deploy this level of a program. So there's modifications to the contract that need to happen in order to get us to the level of program deployment that we need to be at.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so knowing of these changes and kind of where we stand with our program, that there's things that need to happen. This is kind of a brief synopsis of some of the things we need to do moving forward to get us into compliance with these mandates. So we need to implement an extensive diversion program to comply with this legislation. We need to maintain 50% or more on our recycling diversion rate. So that means residents must now source separate their green waste and food waste into a new green cart system to comply with these state mandates. So knowing this challenge, we realize that there's going to be some sizable cost increases in order to comply with these diversion rates. And it's going to also opens the opportunity for us to explore options to help offset these increased costs. So some of the other challenges that we're facing or that we're needing to do moving forward, we need to start requiring blue recycling carts for all households. So we're looking at just over 7,000 new carts to complete the program as it stands right now. And then we need to expand to a 3-cart program, which will allow all households in the city to have a new green organics cart. And just to touch a little bit on this is kind of a caveat from the last study session we had. We were originally looking at a 2-cart, 3-cart type system. But working with CR&R through this process, they brought it to our attention that they're no longer going to be offering the 2-cart wet-dry system as it currently stands now. They've been having challenges with that, with getting the proper diversion. The recoverable material, which is a commodity for them, is not meeting the requirements. So they're trying to move away from this 2-cart system. So knowing that that's not an option for us anymore, we're really kind of in the position where the 3-cart program is where we need to be. So some of the other areas that we needed to look at was increased automation. We talked about this before. We need to require that all refuse material be placed within the carts for pickup. No more bags or boxes or other material piled around the can or outside the carts. That everything needs to be in the cart to create that efficiency we need for the automation. 2 other areas we wanted to be able to define bulky item collection and narrow it down to maybe 5 pickups per household per year, as opposed to the unlimited bulky collection that we have under our current system. Another big area we want to ask for is 2 full-time CR&R staff members for an 18-month period to provide the extensive recycling and organic outreach that would be included in the door-to-door provision and require for contamination monitoring. So this would be to ensure that not only does the program get implemented, that it gets followed by our residents, that they know and understand the program and that they're utilizing it for its intended purpose. And we want to be able to limit the number of free carts, and maybe to one 90-gallon cart per household. If you remember from the last study session, there's a lot of households that have multiple cans per house, which generates a lot of extra processing. So we'd like to start working on narrowing that down. And finally, we want to be able to require a 7-year average collection vehicle age so that we'd have no vehicles over 10 years old out servicing our routes. And that's important for efficiency, that we have well-maintained, well-functioning equipment out on the street servicing our cans for efficiency and for safety. So this is kind of a picture of what the proposed 3-cart option could look like. We could have a blue can there on the left. That would be used for clean recyclables that could be processed at the clean MRF, no more dirty MRF processing. We could have a green organics cart in place for yard trimmings and for food scraps. And that could all be processed at an organic processing facility, which could either be compost or anaerobic digestion. And we could even have the option of a smaller green cart for the space-constrained property areas. This is important because they face the challenges of having room for the cart, but also it's to be noted that a lot of the smaller properties don't generate a lot of green waste or food waste, so it's not necessary for the larger cart, and having the smaller cart could be much more efficient. And then the black trash cart, of course, is for everything else that would go just straight to the landfill. So if the source separation is being done properly, this system would work efficiently and get us what we need. And this would give us the increase in the overall residential diversion rates and also give us the full program implementation.
So Micah, sorry,
Yes.
go back for a second. So last time we were doing a study session, and I probably should have caught this at our subcommittee discussions, the concern that the council had was going to 3-cart systems in certain parts of the city, because a 3-cart system requires 3 trash truck routes, which would put more trash trucks into areas of the city. And that includes, pretty impacted areas like Balboa Island, Peninsula, even into the Heights areas and whatnot. And so we had tried to work through the idea of a 3-cart system in most of the city, and then a 2-cart system in some other parts of the city that would have hopefully have a blend across that would allow for us to meet our compliance requirements. So is what we're talking about today only a 3-cart system? Is that where we've landed in terms of the ability for us to actually meet the standards, or do we still have a blended option in terms of the discussions we're having with our hauler?
So the discussions we're having with our hauler now, and in conjunction with the state mandates, the 3-cart system is really where we're ending up. Our hauler no longer wants to process the 2-cart system. They're moving away from that. In the near future, it will really be no longer an option. So it's kind of put us in a position where the 3-cart system, not only because that's how our hauler needs to handle it, but the state mandate is pushing towards a 3-cart program. And a lot of the other cities in this area have moved to that 3-cart program because it's the program implementation that the state's looking for.
All right, you're going to probably get some questions, Diane, on this one.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to go back to your earlier comment, just trying to, again, set the context for why we're moving in this direction. On your slides, I guess they're not numbered. It's a 73% of total households participating, and our dry recycle diversion rate is currently 43%. So of those households that do have the blue lid recycle card, do we have data on what the percentage of their compliance is or the diversion rate?
Well, it's that 73% that's getting us to the 43% diversion rate.
But, well, I guess let me back up and ask the original question. Why were some households do not have blue cards? Why is that?
So when we initially implemented this contract, the state mandates weren't as stringent at that point. So recycling carts were more optional than mandatory. But now that we've moved through the legislation changes since this contract's been implemented, it's becoming more and more mandatory as opposed to optional. So we're at the point now where it is mandatory. So that's one of the catalysts for needing to make the changes in this contract.
So 100% of our households this is mandatory as we go forward.
Yeah, Cal Recycle wants to see full program implementation. So that would mean every house having that card.
Because over the years, I mean, I've received several questions from residents saying, how come we're not doing more recycling, I don't have a blue can. If people wanted a blue cart, could they request it, or do they have to really wait till all this gets underway?
Oh, they could request that now.
Can they? And that would be
Yeah.
picked up with their normal trash pickup?
That would be part of the existing contract we have in place, yes.
So that's a good message to communicate, that if you do not have a blue cart, request one, and they could start recycling.
Yeah, that's the way it's working right now.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Sorry, just one quick question before we get to Joyce. So when you're talking about full program implementation and requiring everyone to have a blue cart, are we also talking then, when we get into the organic waste diversion requirements, also requiring everyone to have a green cart?
That's correct.
Okay, sorry, I'm going to dwell on this for just a second, because one of the things that we've been trying really hard to do over the last year, and I apologize, I didn't catch this when we were having our subcommittee meeting. One of the things that we've been trying really hard over the last year to do is to not do this. I mean, I don't know how to say it other than that, where, you know, we recognize the need to comply with state mandates. You know, there's been a point of contention for many reasons this year, but we recognize it, and so we're trying to figure out how do we do that. And one of the main concerns we've had while we're working through this is the idea of having to do an implementation of 3 carts across the city. So we've been working really hard to figure out how to get to that 2 cart. Have we reached the point, and this is a question for William also, have we reached the point where we think, based on the data, based on everything that we've seen, that a 2 cart blend is just not feasible?
Well, what I can say is there's, and I'll let William speak to this too, but there's 2 things we're up against. One of them is the options for processing the material are becoming more and more limited. And that, in conjunction with the state legislation moving towards implementing the full program, we've got 2 things working against us, so it's becoming much more and more challenging. But I'll let William speak further to that.
Yeah, why don't you come on up?
Are we live? Okay.
Yep.
Good afternoon. William O'Toole, I'm the president of Economics, and I'll get to your question. In short, yes, you need to get an organic service to each of your residents. We looked at the 2 and the 3 cart option, which is what you referred to earlier and what the group saw in June. Working with the regs, when you look at the requirements for how much material you recover from the organics, there is no system that you can mix organics in with recyclables and trash and get anything out of it except trash. So you're not going to meet the requirements of the law, the regulations, of separating out the organic waste unless you go to a 3 cart system. And CRNR is also looking at their overall collection and processing system, and they've come to the same conclusion that a 2 cart system won't work. They won't be able to meet the requirements of the law, and Newport Beach, consequently, wouldn't be able to meet the requirements of the law.
Okay. All right. We'll go through some more council questions. Ms. Brenner.
As I remember, even if we're forced to have 3 carts, weren't we talking about the space-confined areas having a truck that, only having 2 trucks, so that one of the trucks was divided and could pick up 2 different types of refuse?
Yeah, that's one of the options that there's another city in the desert, Retro Mirage, I believe. They have what's called a split body truck. So the truck can haul 2 different types of material and collect 2 different types of material in that one truck. It's a really new kind of concept. There's only one city in Southern California doing it right now. We did look into that option and explore that option with CRNR. It's very expensive, and there's a lot of trepidation centered around it because they've never used it before, and it's a little bit of a concern there. But it is something we have looked at, and it can still be on the table. But when we talk about, and later in the presentation, we're going to kind of talk about cost, and that's a big factor in that.
Okay, and another question is there at some point do we have to talk about penalties if people don't do this?
Yes, absolutely. So one of the other slides I talked about was asking CR&R to provide the 2 staff members for the 18-month period. And us as a public works department, we brought on code enforcement staff to help with refuse enforcement. So once this mandate's in place and we've updated our municipal code, we'll be able to start imposing enforcement where education hasn't been successful.
And then Mr. Avery.
So is that 18-month period just based on experience of how long it's taken other cities to get on board with it from an education standpoint?
Right. That's the average amount of time it takes to get the program fully implemented and on its way to being a successful program. And that could be extended if needed. As we continue to monitor, if there's more to do, we could certainly extend it for longer.
Sure.
But that's kind of the initial period that's recommended.
And I assume if people have more cans, so they expand into those cans, is there more trash developed? In other words, if you're limited to 2 cans or 3 cans, or the cans are smaller, do people tend to, just curious, compact and have less waste?
Right. You're in a position where you have to be much more selective about managing your trash.
Right.
What you're really throwing away, breaking it down, like you mentioned, be much more resourceful with those options.
And so tightening up the policy of having things outside the trash cans. I've noticed recently, well, it's been about a year now, but at least there's these private small haulers, junk haulers that have started up. There's 2 or 3 of them, businesses that are going around and picking up these items. And I really like the idea of sort of this being handled outside of the normal refuse collection.
Right.
Just to kind of, because there's a cost to it, so it makes people more aware, particularly the large bulky items. I know it's a really great service that we offer, but I know some residents are already, doing that instead of putting stuff out on the street. They're calling a private hauler.
Right.
In these very relatively small trucks, coming and taking stuff away.
Right. There are other options available for managing that excess refuse, if you will. Around the holidays, people generate a lot more trash, typically with packaging and everything else, and that's why those bulky item pickups are helpful. It doesn't have to be just for bulky items. You could just have a large amount of trash that doesn't fit in your bin, and you could use that bulky item pickup to help with that. So there are options available other than just the cans to be able to manage that refuse.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right, Ms. Brenner.
I had one other question. What are we going to do when there are people that just don't have any space to put more cans or don't? I mean, I can do that in my confined space, but I can do that. I can add extra cans. But there are some places on Balboa Island where they don't have room to get a car in their garage, much less trash cans, and there's no physical space for more cans. What are we going to do about that?
Well, if we put the program into what's a 3-cart system, a lot of the households have 2 to 3 carts now. So if we put it into a 3-cart system, it's not so much about an increase in the number of carts, it's just better managing the carts that they're currently using. And even with the smaller organics cart, like we mentioned, a smaller size cart, like down to like a 35-gallon cart, so it's not real big. So even if they're only using 2 cans now, the addition of that smaller cart hopefully wouldn't be too much of an impact. That's our goal.
All right.
That's our hope, Joy.
Yeah.
We drive around and you see a lot of houses have 3 or 4 black cans.
Yeah.
You would take away a black can and put in a blue can, and hopefully they would be moving material out of the black. Same kind of refuge volume. So, and there was one thing that we could put a smaller can too. We were talked about maybe using 2, 3, 35-gallon cans versus 1 big can for the space concern.
Okay.
Ms. Dixon.
Thank you. One other follow-up question. I know we're talking residential, but we did talk in the last study session, and you made a brief reference to this, about there are some households or single-family residents that have many, many trash cans. I mean, more than the normal family, I guess, whatever normal is, but a dozen. What is that going to be part of our code changes and revisions to manage that differently and shift that to commercial? Is that ultimate? I don't want to get ahead of your presentation, but is that incorporated in the ultimate changes that we will be considering tonight?
Yeah, and that part of the 18-month monitoring program, that helps a lot with that, educating people on how to manage their refuse. But and we'll acknowledge there are going to be some situations where people just need more cans. And there's ways to do that, and we could work with them on getting additional cans as they need, and we'll be talking with the council about, do we want to provide free unlimited trash, or do we want to limit it to those number of carts? And if they want extra carts, they can certainly get them, but then they'll need to pay for them. There's other options and ways to do that. But when we're looking at a program model, we really want our program model to be the 3-cart system. But there couldn't be exceptions to that. And through that 18-month period, we'll be able to really identify where those exceptions can be made and what those exceptions should be.
Well, sure, I understand that, but some of these households are actually commercial entities, so how will we get at that?
That's going to be another item that we'll be working on in the working group, is how to maybe identify residential-based businesses, whether or not they should be a commercial type of account as opposed to a residential account.
Okay, thank you.
All right, go ahead.
Back to the slide we left off. Oh, one back. Okay, so this is kind of where we left off. So again, this program would get us an increase in our overall diversion rate and get us the full program implementation we're looking for. So knowing these challenges we're facing, knowing how we're going to have to change our model, we reached out to CRNR, our service provider, and started having a discussion with them on getting some price quotes for the adjustments in this. So they sent us an initial proposal back in October that showed about a 67% rate adjustment to be able to implement this program. That's about an increase of $3.3 million a year. So their initially proposed program would increase the cost per household from about the current rate of $15.22 up to about $25.42 per month. So we reviewed this proposal, and we've identified some potential cost-saving areas, and we've asked for some proposal revisions, and these negotiations are ongoing. But the CRNR has made some initial cost reductions and revised the program pricing through several meetings with city and our consultants. So these additional reductions are contingent upon the development of what's known as a cost reconciliation process, which would allow for a true-up process over the first few years of implementation. So they may give us the lower rate up front, but as we start to realize what the true data is behind those contract unknowns, then that rate could potentially be adjusted up to meet the level of service that we're not exactly sure is going to be required. So speaking of those contract unknowns, this is just kind of a quick breakdown or summary of the things we just don't know until the program's implemented of what this stuff's going to look like. So, the per household contribution rate of organics, that's something that we're not able to get a handle on until the program's in place. There's some concerns around productivity rates, the expanded recycling route, the number of household service per hour for these organics routes. There's going to be a reduction in the MSW route. Also, there's hourly operational cost and productivity for the single pass rear loader in some of the space constrained areas. And there's also the question about recoverability levels for the recyclables collected on the expanded recycling route and after the extensive outreach. So really, once the program's implemented and you've made the changes and you're able to do that monitoring process, then you'll really know how much material you're recovering, how successful is the program, are they able to sell out their commodities to the level where they feel like they're getting a cost recovery. So these are some of the questions around our negotiations right now that we're trying to work through. So these are kind of some of our options moving forward. There's some alternatives here, and these are some estimated cost impacts. As recent as November 16th, we've met with CRNR to talk through these, and this is kind of where we stand today with our negotiations. So one of the alternatives is alternative one, which would be to continue negotiations without the reconciliation mechanism in place, and that would be assuming we'd be willing to do an 8 to 10 year term. That puts us at the $23 to $24 range, which would be more around a high-end 50% increase. Or there's option two, where we can continue negotiations with the reconciliation mechanism in place, assuming that 8 to 10 year term. That gets us the lower rate up front, but like I mentioned before, there will be additional costs assumed moving forward, and there will be some adjustments there that we'll have to come to terms with.
And the phrase indicated cost per household just means that we haven't reached a deal with CRNR, but that's the range of negotiations?
That's the initial range that we're at right now with negotiations, correct?
Okay.
And then there's alternative 3, where we could continue negotiations for a 3-year contract to accommodate the rollout of all these program changes and develop the base data needed to really define the contract cost. And that could be done either through the negotiation or an RFP process. But like we talked about, there's a lot of contract unknowns. So through this option, we'd be able to really roll out the program and get a good look at it and know what our true needs are and be able to assign a more accurate rate to that program. So obviously that'll require some further analysis, but that is an option. And then finally, the other alternative is to just go the RFP route, where we could prepare an RFP with a contract start date of October 2021. And that would initiate our residential organics program starting in October of 2021. So that's a fast timeline. We wouldn't be able to make any program changes. We'd have to wait for the new RFP to be delivered and awarded to be able to put the program together. So again, that puts us in more of a range of what the rate could look like. And these are just kind of market rates. We really don't know what's going to be proposed through the process, but it gives an idea of what we could be looking at.
All right, stay here for a second, please. Ms. Dixon.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Now, this isn't all completely unknown. I mean, there are cities, and I know on the next slide you're going to be talking about other cities that have already implemented this similar types of programs. So there is data available, isn't there, in terms of the range of compliance and usage? So we're not operating totally with unknowns, correct?
You could take that position, certainly. There's other cities that we could compare ourselves to that have a similar program. Each city's unique, and our city's unique with regards to the space constraint areas and stuff like that. But that's why we're looking to CR&R. And you'll see on the next slide, they've got contracts with these other cities. So through this negotiation process, we're hoping that we could chew that up a little more. But that's the position we're in right now.
Okay, another question. As we begin to look at these alternative plans, and obviously each of them requires a significant increase in cost, what can we do to help our residents become more compliant from an education, communication standpoint? That would have a direct impact on potentially lowering the cost. Is there anything we can do?
Well, there are some things we could do now, and like we talked about earlier, having the blue can. They had the blue can in place, and they really started source separating to the level that they could. We could recover more cleaner material that way. It would help our numbers. It would help our program implementation. That's a change we could start moving towards now. But we still have the organics part of it to deal with in 2022.
Right, that's separate.
Right.
But the communication, the education effort, because so many people do want us to, I mean, they are conscientious consumers and want to do the right thing from an environmental standpoint. So I think if we could incorporate into our education program some kind of incentive, and there's no guarantee, but the more compliance we get to make the separation distinct and easier to handle on the storage end, it might have a benefit, and then under the reconciliation program that we'll see what our actual costs are as we're into this. And if our residents are really working hard to keep everything separated, that might produce some good numbers that would ultimately lower the monthly rate. Is that assumption correct?
No, that is correct. And also, like we talked about, getting all the material into the can. So any material that's left outside the can in those bags, it goes straight into the trash. There could be a lot of recyclable material in there, but no one's going to sort through all that, so it just goes right into the mainstream waste. So if everyone manages that material, gets it into the can it belongs in, there's much more material to recover and cleaner material.
And then to what Mr. Avery was saying, if we had, if I think I saw on an earlier slide that we're building in a cost of picking up 5 times a year or some number of times a year that we would pick up these bulky items, and incorporating that in our cost structure. But maybe if residents want to do that, not everybody has bulky items, and why should they be paying for it if they never have a bulky item? But for those who do, then they could arrange for the pickup and carting away on their own. Just looking at possible variables with the end result is helping to lower these costs as much as possible to our residents, because they could help own the success of this program.
Yes, absolutely.
And real quick, before we get to Mr. Avery, the To Councilwoman Dixon's point about the comparisons, it's on the next slide, so we'll get there in just a second. But before we do that, Mr. Avery.
So we're, as a city, are we early to the game or late to the game of recycling and really promoting recycling?
Oh, we're starting to be a little late in the game.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. So I think, yeah, there's obviously, I think the education program is really important. And besides the cost, of course, there's an environmental factor, and, you know, it'd be good for the city to lead on that a little more. And I mentioned this book before called Zero Waste. And, you know, when households really put their minds to it, you can dramatically reduce refuse and waste, and, you know, through composting and just being smart about packaging, what you're buying, that kind of thing. And I don't think we're, you know, as a city, we're ready for that. But I think that should be something that people should be made aware of, because it's, you know, there aren't many ways we can impact the world, but from an environmental standpoint, to be able to reduce trash and also save money is a real win. And especially it's great to educate kids in a household about all that. So I think culturally as a city, we haven't done that very much. I'm sure there are families that do, but I think it would be really good for the city to lead a little more in this regard. And then we should also seed it with perhaps making it a little more painful to you know, put out large amounts of trash. If someone just wants an extra can, I don't know, you know, if all the neighbors are complying, but they want an extra can, I guess a bigger family. Also, there are, you know, a good number of businesses that are group homes in neighborhoods. They do a wonderful job serving the elderly and certainly working with people with addictions, but they are for-profit businesses, and there should be a cost of doing business, and they shouldn't be, you know, paying a residential rate. So I think looking at all aspects of this from a cost standpoint, and then layering on top, you know, a program to sort of educate and really try and get residents behind it, and you know, work on that, because I do feel we're a little late to the game as well. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, and at a time when we're encouraging everyone to shop local anyway to save our local and small businesses, it would sure cut down on a lot of online shipping and Amazon boxes. So I would strongly encourage everyone to do that. Apparently not just for our local economy, but for the environment too. So now I've got a double pitch. Ms. Brenner.
I know when I go shoe shopping, I leave the box at the shoe store. I don't bring it home with me because I, you know, and I think maybe the more of that we can do, the better. So, but I do have a question about so many of the people in our community are elderly. Have we talked to Laguna Woods and places like that? Because I'm really concerned about how difficult this is going to be for people in our community that are maybe compromised and not able to do this all themselves.
Yeah, a lot of the, you know, our consultant here, William with Economics, they've worked with a lot of other cities who've had to implement this program in other areas and have addressed those type of concerns. And through our education and outreach phase of the program implementation is where we would address those and identify those needs. There's certainly ways of doing that.
If you recall, in the working group, one of the things we talked about was maybe some kind of valet service that could be offered for the folks who really need an extra hand. Some cities do that. I think we used to have that as kind of a free service, but that could be included when the council gets down to the brass tacks of what's in the deal. That could be an option. I was going to comment on Micah to Councilmember Dixon's comments. We are, in the working groups, done a lot of work at also looking for cost recovery and some of those things, as you mentioned. Having one can paid for, as we're looking with the city attorney's office, makes a lot of sense, because when I talk to the hauler, many times people have multiple cans, and they might have 5 or 6 cans, and when they pick them up, they're half full. And that's an inefficiency, you know, because they have a lot of room. If we could get them to fill 2 cans versus 4, that saves the city money and also kind of helps them realize that, you know, how much refuge you're generating. Some of the cost savings we've talked about that we'd want to bring to you are, there are people in the community that probably ought to be paying a rate that aren't really a true residential. They could be a commercial care unit. And we've seen cases, I have one in Corona Del Mar that sends me pictures of 10 cans out in front. And they're really not acting as a residential unit anymore. They're acting as, or some of our short-term lodgings are acting as hotel rooms. Maybe they should pay a commercial rate. And the working group, to their credit, has looked at that and said, there's some cost recovery the city can get back in here. That's something we'd work in the hauler too. So some of the cost recovery, you'll notice, are in the proposal with CR&R we're talking about now. Some of them will be separate actions that we can do. One last thing to Councilmember Dixon's comment. You could, it's maybe a recommendation, and I failed to mention earlier, this item's going to be before you on item 20 tonight. We need an action from you. Tonight we're just talking about it, but there are some specific actions. But if you have recommendations to encourage recycling and getting more people to put things in their cans, we could start an educational outreach on that. And we could also roll out all the recycled cans. We could put out those other 2,000 cans now and just make it so people start recycling instead of waiting for them to ask for a can. That might be something you want to think about, and we could talk about later tonight.
I had one additional question. In one of our group sessions, it seems like you mentioned that some cities have their commercial and their residential hauler as the same. Did I hear that? And is that something that we've looked at in order to cut down on the number of trucks that we're having in our communities?
Well, some cities are under what's called an exclusive franchise. So that means they have one hauler doing all the refuse. Here we're an open franchise, so even with our residential contracts, they're open. So that means we are open competitive market for haulers to be able to provide those services.
Would that eliminate some of the trucks if we were not?
It potentially could, yes.
It would, but, and we've had some discussions, and the council have to come to thoughts on that, because there is a level of competitiveness, and I think in the past we have liked that open hauler commercial side. It gives people choice. So with a close, you'd have less choice, but you might bid out and get a different cost, maybe a lower cost. So it would result in less pickups. And we have an item after this tonight on the study session. We want to talk to you a little bit about commercial exclusiveness, because we've had some conversations with folks on that too. So after we're done with residential, we'll move into that discussion.
Okay, good, thanks.
One more, Mr. Duffield.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a relative that lives in Oregon on Lake Oswego, and for the last decade or longer, when I visit and I'm in the kitchen and I have something in my hand I'm going to throw away, it is very specific where it goes. And they've been doing this, as I say, for a long time. And so it starts in the kitchen, and what I've witnessed is when you put it in the right place, it's pretty darn easy after that, okay? So this will take some time, but I'd like to be a cheerleader on this, that I've seen it work. It takes time, but you go to my sister's house, you put something in the wrong place, you're not coming back for a decade or something. So truly, people do want to do it. They just need to know how and get used to it. Thank you.
And then Ms. Dixon.
Just real quick to follow up on that. I mean, it does require education and behavior change, and none of us want to be. We don't want to be a punitive city. I think this benefits, the end result is that it benefits our environment, benefits all of us, and potentially can lower our operating costs just because we'll be more efficient. I think I've also told the story my daughter lives in Brooklyn, New York, and you get fined. They won't pick it up if it's not sorted correctly. And that's New York is New York, but it does drive compliance. And same thing, put it in this, don't put it there, put it here. From newspapers to plastics, and there are 3 different, and food, there are 4 different separations. And it drives me nuts, but it really is a workable system and it becomes second nature. So we're really talking behavior change for a good reason, not to be punitive.
All right, let's go to the next slide.
Okay, so here's a comparison of other cities. These are all cities who've gone through the RFP process, just like we're talking about doing here tonight. They've all moved to a 3-cart system. So you can see there in the next column who the hauler is. CR&R is providing service to the majority of these, with the exception of Mission Viejo, who has waste management. The pre-program monthly rate, that's the rate that they were paying before the implementation of this organic system. And then the monthly rate as recent as July of this year shows what they're paying now as a result of the implementation. So, and this was done through an RFP process. And it kind of shows you the percent change. And it's also either compost or AD processing. Those are kind of the two options right now. The majority has moved towards the AD processing. But you can see us there at the bottom, and this is CRNR's initial proposal. This isn't exactly what we've landed on or where we're going to end up, but this is the initial proposal that put us, wanting to look at this comparison and make this comparison. And then below that, you have the averages throughout the county, and just kind of puts into perspective where we're at and where we need to be. So on the next slide, like Dave mentioned, we have an item coming before you later tonight in the council meeting, item 20. And this really just kind of gives you, put things in a nutshell of kind of where we're at and the recommendation we need from council moving forward. And we have some contract terms here with the city contract. It expires March 31st of next year. This agreement can be extended for up to 36 months with a 90-day written notice. And then the Newport Coast contract, that expires on October 1st of next year, and that could be extended with a 180-day notice for one more additional year, and that can happen automatically. But that's kind of the parameters we have to work in, and so we've kind of narrowed it down to these two options, or even a third option. But option one, we'd like to either possibly extend this CRNR agreement through October 1st, so we could continue the negotiations for a compliant residential collection program, or we could extend the agreement to October 1st to continue negotiations, but also prepare a RFP and obtain competitive market pricing for this residential refuse collection program if necessary. Or there could be a third option where council could direct us to do something as they desire.
All right. So I'm going to jump around on a couple of slides, but let's stay on this one for just a second. So, part of the quick reminder to everybody that Joy and Diane and I are on the this residential refuse ad hoc committee, and so we've had an opportunity to talk through this a bit, this is, I'm not saying this is a unanimous view from the group, but it's what we were at least discussing in the context of it. My recommendation would be a slight hybrid of what we're looking at in this option 1 and 2, and so I want to walk through the thought process. Let's go back a few slides to the unknown, that one. Okay, so we're looking at basically 3 different concepts here. The first one is to have a contract with CRNR with fixed terms. The challenge, and they all have challenges, and I'm just going to talk real quick about the challenges. If we went to a fixed term contract, the price is going to likely be higher. Can you move one slide up? Nope, sorry, the other way. It's likely going to be higher, and you can see this in alternative number 1. And the reason for that is because there's what's built into contracts like this is basically an uncertainty premium. Let's go back a slide now. If our hauler doesn't know how much it's going to cost to do all of this, they're going to build in a buffer, that uncertainty premium concept. And so we could have the certainty of a price, but the likelihood is that it would be more expensive. Let's move forward. So, keep in mind the difference between 2325 and 2180, or 2420 and 2274. I mean, the difference is what? It's almost is it $1 million? Yeah, and that's the thing. I need to stress just how expensive this is, because we can't be lost in the weeds on this and think that 2420 and 2274. I mean, we're talking a couple dollars. No, we're talking $1 million or so, somewhere in that range. And so it really matters when we're looking at this what the potential differences in costs are. Number two is that reconciliation concept. Let's go back a slide. So when we're looking at this, you can take care of this contract unknowns by basically having, those unknowns taken care of. Certainly in the first couple of years, perhaps it has to go to 3, but a hauler would know pretty quickly, and then you'd have a pretty smooth contract term, likely at least a pretty smooth contract term for the balance of it. You just won't know exactly how much it is year in, year out for the first 2, maybe 3 years, but it would at least smooth out and most likely result in a reduction that from the first alternative, simply because you actually know what the hard costs are. It just requires a little bit more staff time and potentially our contractor to help us out in those first 2 or 3 years. And then let's go forward one more, and then the RFP alternative. So the RFP alternative is an interesting. It's an interesting one. The challenge with the RFP alternative is, one, we actually have seen what the RFP responses have looked like in other cities. Let's move forward one. And so what we're seeing is responses from the hauler we're already using and from Waste Management, most recently in Mission Viejo, right in those ranges that we would anticipate seeing the costs being. And the challenge is that a city like Mission Viejo, a lot more spacious than the city of Newport Beach, so you could probably have a pretty good idea of what the cost would be if you're going in and bidding that, as opposed to ours, which have those unknowns, and so you're going to have those built-in premiums. And so if you go to the RFP route, you can't really do the reconciliation approach because you're not going to be getting you won't be getting a bid that has anything but the uncertainty premiums built into it. So that said, my preference would be, and let's move forward one slide. My preference would be tonight to approve the extension, which will be item number 20. 20. With the idea that we need a little bit more time to try to reach a deal with CR&R. But when I mean a little, I mean a little, because given our requirements for compliance, if we need to go to RFP, I think we need to go to RFP by the end of January. And so my recommendation on this would be to try to reach a deal that we would feel comfortable coming to council with and making a recommendation on by the second meeting in January, or make a recommendation we go to RFP, or frankly both. If we brought an agreement to council and the majority of council said no, that's not what we want to do, then we go to the alternative is we go to RFP. So what I'm saying is we've got a timeline here. To question from Mr. Avery on are we a little bit later, are we in the middle, or are we early? In this process, I think we're getting to the point where we need to fish or cut bait, and so my recommendation, frankly, is it's not simple, but I think as I've laid all of this out, I wanted to make sure I was explaining my thought process. I think the thought process is simple. We have, the best offer that we can get from CR&R to cover all of the needs that we have. We bring it to council on the second meeting of January. Council either approves or doesn't. If it doesn't approve, then we go out we initiate the RFP process. And at least, and we would do it with eyes wide open, knowing that there's a decent chance that it would come back and we'd see an increased amount because we wouldn't be able to go through the reconciliation process on an RFP. But again, that's a risk that we have to take at the dais. But I think given the timeline, I think that's where we are at this point. So that's my pitch on where I think we get to, and we'll go to Ms. Dixon.
Thank you, Mayor. Couple follow-up comments. On these list of cities on the prior slide, Laguna Beach, I don't see Laguna there, and I mean, some of their condensed high-density areas are similar to ours. Who do they use?
They use Waste Management.
Do we have any numbers for Laguna Beach?
I'm going to jump ahead really quick here. I've got a backup slide that's got some other cities.
You come
Sorry about
prepared.
that. Whoops.
Manny's like,
Laguna, no, Laguna de Gal.
Laguna Beach isn't on here. Laguna de Gal is.
Okay.
And San Clemente is on here.
I see, all right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, I'm sorry, go ahead.
These cities have all, had rate adjustments, not just through the RFP process, but also through contract negotiations as well. So this list is much more expansive because of that. The original list was just focused on the RFP change, but these are all recent rate adjustments for other cities in the community.
To follow up on the mayor's comments, and I concur with his direction at this point, I just really kind of have a process question. I know staff has been working with CR&R and trying to narrow this gap. You know what the issues are, you know what the challenges are. It's either we can come to some kind of an agreement that's in line with what our expectations are, or we, as the mayor said, fish or cut bait, and give us plenty of time to go out and see what there is out there in the competitive marketplace. Because, you've been talking for several months, I don't know, are we close, or is this as far as we've gotten, and so...
There's still some cost adjustments that can be addressed through the negotiation process, but the bulk of it's been handled, and we're down to the point where there's a lot of unknowns. And so how much further we could get, I'm not sure, but there could still be some work there, but we're starting to compile a list of unknowns, and that's just something we're up against.
Okay, all right, thanks.
All right. Any other discussion on that for now? All right, let's move into the commercial, if preferably quickly, because...
Yeah, we could go through this pretty quick. This is just to discuss the potential of some exclusive commercial refuse collection zones. So as we talked about before, we've got 17 non-exclusive franchise haulers in the city. 5 of them are what are known as a Tier 1 hauler, meaning they could handle all the commercial refuse and for multifamily units, for recyclables, trash, and organics. The downside to this open system has been that there's multiple haulers servicing multiple businesses throughout the city, leading to an excessive amount of truck traffic, disruptions to nearby businesses and residents, and impacts to the streets. So just kind of to narrow down that focus. So each one of these pins, each color represents a different hauler. So you can see there's all these different haulers servicing these areas on any given day. Some of these accounts are a daily service, some of them are 2 or 3 times a week. It just depends on the level of need. But you could kind of see there the level of impact in those areas with these multiple haulers. Here's kind of a in-person picture view of what it looks like. This is the alley behind Marine Avenue. There's just a lot of bins in there from a lot of different haulers. So there's multiple trucks driving up and down these alleys to service these bins. Again, like I said, daily at most.
Just real quick, there are 5 haulers in each one of these areas, and we've talked to these folks who brought it forward. So in Corona Del Mar and Marine Avenue only, there are 5 haulers on every one of those alleys a day. They're picking up daily on these commercials.
This is kind of an impact of what it looks like at the street level. You get close to the ends of the alleys, and there's a truck, having to roll the bin across the street to be able to service it. There's other trucks coming in behind that, trying to get into the alley, and it's just a small little picture of the level of impact it has. This is another look at Corona Del Mar. Each color is a different route, different hauler, and you can see how impacted that small little residential area is. They're adjacent to the village, and it's created a lot of concern and angst for the community there. And so really, the potential resolution to this is maybe establishing exclusive commercial franchise zones. So it would be targeted to where one hauler could operate in this area, specific areas like blocks or specific neighborhoods, and that would reduce the truck traffic, trips, or conflicts. And we could even bid it out to a 5 to 7 year term for an exclusive franchise to service these areas. And then the remaining area of the city would still be an open franchise, so we'd still be an open franchise city. We're just narrowing it down to specific zones in these areas where we're having these issues. And then again, this reduces a lot of the congestion and problems associated with that. So and just to preface this, it's a big process to do it, and that's why we were wanted to kind of try to break the ice with it here tonight to see if there's interest in it. If there is, we could certainly go down that road, but it's going to be a long, arduous process. Even consulting with the city attorney's office, there's a 5-year lead time on the notification it takes to do this. So it can be done, and if everyone feels it's worthwhile, we could certainly go down that road. But we want to kind of get a somewhat of a feel for the council's interest in this.
Ms. Brenner.
I've spoken with the Corona Del Mar bid about this, and some of my merchants and a lot of the residents, and I'm very interested in this because one of the problems with having all the different trucks is that some of them are pulling in, some of them are backing up, they're beeping as they're backing up. It's so close to the residences that are adjacent to our business district that it's really problematic. And in talking with the businesses, we also thought that we might be able to actually save the businesses some money by putting this out for bid and having the different haulers compete to give them a rate. So I think from the standpoint of just convenience to our people that both work and live in our small areas like this, that it's definitely worth considering. And I'm also wondering if we should at least look at the possibility of having one hauler for our residential and our commercial, and seeing if maybe they would give us if they would negotiate with us even more aggressively if we were also including our commercial districts in that.
So I'd be interested in this, but I'd rather have it kind of vetted a little bit more at the ad hoc level, because there's a lot here, and if it's going to take 5 years on even a special zone, it would take it doesn't strike me that we have the option, at least for now, to deal with combining it into the residential. But I'm open to having the conversation, but I'd rather do a little bit more of vetting at the ad hoc level than here, because I have a lot of questions, and I'd rather ask them. I'd rather ask them when there's a little bit more time to think it through.
Oh, absolutely. We can make this an agenda item for the ad hoc committee to continue to explore.
Yeah, let's do that. I think right now we really need to stay focused on the residential, but especially if we've got a 5-year 5-year. I was going to ask how it affects the current franchises. I'm not surprised that there's a pretty long lead time. Okay, now, I think we can vet through this. All right, we'll bring it back for discussion on at least what I had made the recommendation. But for now, I think let's go out to public comment on it. So the community room is open, but for the folks who are here, why don't you come on up, and we'll have traditional public comment. Feel like the good old days, sort of. Either one. Can you tap it just to see if it's on? Okay.
Hi, Nancy Scarborough here. Thank you. I want to ask the question if you have considered accessory dwelling units. We're compelled to have unlimited number of those. We could double our population in a matter of 10 years. They have one water bill, and they have multiple families living in one home. So how do we address that? How many cans do they get? Do they all have to have the same number of cans? 3 families put all their trash in one can? Don't know. That's just a question. Second question is regarding California energy requirements and vehicles, the trash trucks. If we get all new trucks, and then California continues on its current path to restrict the types of fuel that those vehicles can use, in 5 or 10 years, we could have a requirement for all electric vehicles or some other kind of fuel. So we now have new trucks that we're going to replace. What happens when we have to do that? And the third is just a suggestion. It seems to me that short-term lodging really is a business, and I would suggest that we consider it to function as a business and maybe put those people in the business category. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. Happy Thanksgiving. I want to thank staff for this. This is a really tough project. I mean, nobody likes trash, but so many people are addicted to generating trash. So this is a really tough one. Thank you. I took some notes. I'll start with a quick one to answer Diane's question about Laguna Beach. The only thing I know is that after our first study session, and I asked them, I said, does every street in Laguna have 3 cars? The answer was yes. I don't know anything else. It's just hard to change habit, plus the compliance things staff mentioned. So I would echo to what you said, is that since we're changing, we'll just change it to the best possibility we can now with the knowledge that it's just hard to change habits. So I'm actually really excited about this public education part. Looks like we have quite a few experts here. Besides, Brett mentioned Zero Waste Home, and Duffy is going to do that too. It's really a water quality problem too. And then we got Will's tying this with shop local. Yes, I think we need some PSA to tie these things together. And Joy has been saying environmental justice, that's just another problem. I mean, since COVID started, there are just so many articles about the dignity of sanitation workers. So when we generate trash, we need to think about that side. They pick up our trash. What do they get, right? So, yeah. Public education, that will be exciting. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Mayor O'Neill, members of the council, my name is Jim Mosher. First of all, this item strikes me as the kind of item that would really have benefited from the presentation being posted for the public and you to review before you came here to the study session. There were a lot of numbers to look at, and if you'd looked at those before, I think you would be helpful for everybody. As to the proposal for a 3-cart system, I wanted to recollect, I think I'm correct about this, before we had the contract with CR&R in 2013, everybody provided their own trash barrels. There was no such thing as a blue-topped trash barrel, as I recall. And to avoid the necessity for that, the people at that time and for several years before that had been asked to pay a recycling fee, which we continue to pay. Comes on our municipal bill every 2 months. And so some people may now think, because that fee was supposed to handle the recycling without the need for the blue top, that the vendor is kind of now asking us to do what we are paying the vendor to do, or thought that we were. However that is, I think it's important for the council to understand that CR&R serves other residential areas within Newport Beach under a separate contract which it has with the Costa Mesa Sanitary District. Those areas, which include Santa Ana Heights and some areas along the border with Costa Mesa near the Back Bay, are served currently with a 2-cart system, a black top cart for just waste in general and an organics cart. CR&R consistently reports to the Costa Mesa Sanitary District that they are achieving 60% recycling, 49% in the mixed cart with no sorting on the part of the residents, and 100% in the organics cart. So that comes out to 60%. So I'm wondering why we are doing so poorly and why we could not also get 60% with the same system, same vendor. And that district is worrying about complying with what they think is or was stated by the state as being a goal to get 75% diversion by this year, 2020, which they have not managed to reach. So I'm wondering if there is a 75% goal that we as a city also have to reach. And as Councilman Avery alluded to, diversion and these percentages mean nothing at all if the volume of trash is always increasing. And I have heard, and I believe, that the real goal of the state is to reduce the per capita amount, the total pounds of trash that go to the landfill per capita from a city below a certain amount. and I'm wondering how we are doing on that goal. And then finally, in addition to certain areas being covered by CR&R different contracts, I think we have some isolated residential areas served by waste management already, so it might be good to know how they are handling those areas. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go to the next speaker, please.
Good evening, members of the Council. My name is Charles Clough. I didn't intend to speak on this subject, but there's a couple of things I'd like to throw out. First is when the city transferred from city-sponsored, city-provided waste hauling, one of the pitches given to the citizens was that they weren't recycling before and they didn't have to now. So it was pitched as being optional. And folks kind of remember that, and that it was never pitched to them as someday going to be a requirement. Additionally, regarding commercial and the other trash haulers in Newport Heights where we live, they routinely cut through Newport Heights going from 17th Street down to PCH. We know they are not our waste haulers because they're not CR&R, and every day there's a plethora of them that make their way instead of going around Newport Boulevard or Dover like they're supposed to. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, do we have any speakers in the community room? All right, do we have any calls? Okay. So we'll bring it back. Dean, I actually have a question on the point raised by Nancy about the fuel changes that are required from time to time on trucks. You know, a large part of any bid on something like this is going to include the infrastructure, and the trucks are pretty expensive. So, what are your thoughts in terms of where the state seems to be headed and for the for the trucks?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. Dean Ruffridge with CR&R. We're very involved with the state and with the governor in providing clean air vehicles, and we have supported, as CR&R, as most of the haulers have supported, the change to electric vehicles by 2035. Now, currently, there is not an electric vehicle that I could buy to do a route in the city. It won't finish. The electric vehicles that are available right now will do about a half a day before they need to be charged. The other issue with electric vehicles is that they're considerably heavier, so there's more wear and tear on the infrastructure and less payload. So it could add routes and so forth. The technology for the large trucks is just not there yet, and I think that's one of the reasons why the governor went out to 2035 for that requirement. And hopefully the technology will catch up to it.
Okay.
And if there's one other thing I could add, Mr. Mayor, and it was brought up earlier about the 2-cart system versus the 3-cart system. I think that's an important thing to make a comment on tonight. I think CR&R is the last company in the county to provide 2-cart programs. We provide it in 4 communities: Newport Beach, Costa Mesa, Stanton, and Rossmore. And all 4 of those communities, we have made a proposal to change to a 3-cart program. So we will eliminate 2-cart programs in Orange County. Costa Mesa will not review it until after the first of the year, but they do have the proposal. Rossmore, that's the county area. They will require us to go to a 3-cart program. They have a single-cart program right now, believe it or not. And the other one, Stanton. The city of Stanton has already approved the 3-cart program and approved the rate, and that will go to council in January also. So Costa Mesa and Newport will be the last 2, and I'm assuming that'll happen in the next few months.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Ms. Dixon.
Just one other question. I thought there was another question before. If you wouldn't mind answering. Dean, if you want to, sorry to pull you back. On the fuel source, when I went out to Paris, isn't that part of aren't all your trucks now clean natural gas, CNG?
Most all of them are, and actually we're running RNG, renewable natural gas.
Even better.
So one of the things we brought up to the governor and the Cal Recycle is that our fuel, RNG, is actually cleaner than electricity, because it's got a negative impact on the environment. The other thing is, which I hope explains that, and that's something the governor's taking into consideration right now, because RNG is a new thing. There's 2 more anaerobic digestion plants that are under construction in San Diego County, as you're probably aware of, and that hauler, which is a private hauler also, will be lobbying the governor and his office on the same issue as we are. Now, the other thing is getting to 75%. That's a tough one. So CR&R is the only company right now that has signed contracts with CMEX up in Victorville. We have an option for some of our cities. Costa Mesa Sand District is considering that right now, and Mr. Mosier, I'll talk to him about that later. But we've brought to their attention, to get to 75, we've got to stop taking stuff to the landfill. So that landfill residual from the blue barrel or the landfill barrel itself can be burned in lieu of using coal at the cement plants. A lot of people don't realize it, but right now the coal plant in Victorville burns coal, about 150 train car loads a day of coal. And they're outside of the air district and so forth and so forth. With our EMSW program and preparing product to burn, we will eliminate substantial amount of coal coming from the Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Indiana areas into Southern California. So that's something we've signed contracts on. We're ready to propose it to Costa Mesa. They're very Costa Mesa Sanitary District, excuse me. And that's something that we could talk to you and your staff about in the future.
Very good. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. All right, so let's go back to the options real quick, just so I can highlight this. We don't actually have to do a straw poll tonight because we actually have something on for current business on item 20. But I do want to just highlight again the thought process, at least on this issue, is just set up a time. I mean, we need a timeline. We're starting to get into crunch time. So the thought process would be to recommend that we approve, it would basically be item B1 on item 20 tonight, extend it out with the caveat that we would bring this back for the second meeting in January for either an approval of terms with CR&R or to go out to RFP. So unless folks have, strong opinions on that, we can move on to the next item. All right, seeing none. Thank you very much. Appreciate this. All right, we'll now move into public comments. Madam Clerk.
The City Council of Newport Beach welcomes and encourages community participation. Public comments are invited on items listed on the agenda and non-agenda items. Speakers must limit comments to 3 minutes per person to allow everyone to speak. Written comments are encouraged as well. The City Council has discretion to extend or shorten the time limit on agenda or non-agenda items.
All right. Do we have any public comments in the room first?
Good evening again. I have a comment on the circulation element update. So Diane, Brett, Joy, thanks for coming to the workshop last night. And I also want to say thank you to staff, another night of working overtime. So I think we're all learning this online workshop thing, let alone government stuff is pretty boring. So really need to figure out how to spice it up. So as we plan more online workshops, and I hope we could also put in decent amount of more, maybe I should say more, what's decent, right? So more effort on collective brainstorming on how to make these workshops more exciting. Another thing, something I've always thought about, not just about last night, generally, I've been thinking about the preparedness of the participants. I mean, most people don't really understand this government stuff anyway. So if in our invitation, we could give some homework or a cliffhanger, something to get them start thinking about it before the meeting. And also at the end of the meeting, give a little homework or take away something. They can keep thinking about it and talk about it with neighbors, other people. So I think that would go a longer way. So actually, I only started paying attention to the subject last year since the General Plan Update Committee. I find it fascinating. This is related to everything. It's air quality, it's water quality, it's just about everything that's connected to circulation. And so many articles about smart cities talk about it, so this is only more exciting, using technology, new things to do. This is a pivotal moment we have a say here. Lastly, I think we are onto a really good start. Last week, Planning Commission meeting got several public comments. So last night I counted at 2 points. At one point we have 16 people, another point we have 15 people, non-city people. So we're doubling. So hopefully next time we get 30 people. That's pretty good, right? Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comments? Do we have any in the community room? All right, do we have any calls? All right, we'll bring it back. Before we jump into the closed session description, just so everyone knows, tonight the council is going to do the closed session in this council chamber, so we're going to clear everyone out after we do this. And just this might be for AV purposes. I don't want to sit here and talk sideways to my council members, so I'm going to go down there. Can we keep some of the mics on? So maybe not. All right, I'll speak loud. All right, that's fine. All right, so we'll. All right, Mr. Harp, closed session, please.
Thank you, Mayor O'Neill. The City Council will adjourn to closed session to discuss items 4A and B, including meeting with council to discuss the performance of the city manager, city attorney, and city clerk, and also to meet with labor negotiators, Mayor Will O'Neill and Brad Avery, Mayor Pro Tem Brad Avery, to discuss labor negotiations with the city manager, city attorney, and city clerk. Thank you.
All right, thank you. We're going to stand in recess until 6 o'clock, regular meeting. Thank you.